Boots Riley is a poet, rapper, songwriter, producer, screenwriter, humorist, political organizer, community activist, lecturer, and public speaker. He is the lead vocalist and co-founder of the group The Coup, whose lyrics critique, observe, and lampoon capitalism, American politics, patriarchal exploitation, and police brutality, among other things. Also in 1991, he and other hip-hop artists created the Mau Mau Rhythm Collective, put on the hip-hop edutainment concerts, which allied with and promoted the campaigns of community-based organizations like Women's Economic Agenda Project, Cop Watch, International Campaign to Free Geronimo Pratt, and the Black Panther Alumni Association. He also founded Show Your Ass Words, Sounds, and Pictures, a media company specializing in music and art that he calls relevant to social change. He is also the only known musical artist whose surveillance by intelligence agents has been exposed due to WikiLeaks documents. For this conversation today, he will also be joined by Dave Zirin, who is a writer on the politics of sports. He's a sports editor for The Nation. He's a Sirius XM co-host of The Collision and author of 8 books. So at this time, will you please help me welcome Boots Riley and Dave Zirin.
Give it up, please, for the good people at Busboys and Poets, Marquise, Christopher, AJ, everybody who is making this happen. Thank you all so much. And a quick shout out and anniversary note. Almost 10 years ago to the day, tonight, the first ever event took place on this stage. The restaurant hadn't even opened yet. There was still paper up on the windows, and all they could serve was water. And this is true, people just drinking jugs of water, and it was Etan Thomas, who then was a 23-year-old center for the Washington Wizards, and myself. And it was a blast. And it wouldn't have happened without the great people at Teaching for Change, who ran the bookstore here for so many years. And so I just wanted to give love to Deborah Menkart, who's in the crowd somewhere, and Teaching for Change, who held it down politically. And it's great to see that post-Teaching for Change, Busboys and Poets is still committed to bringing radical voices into this space, because what is Boots Riley if not a radical voice? Thank you, sir. So, hello, Boots.
What's up?
First question for you, sir. You've been traveling, you've been touring. You're in the District of Columbia. How's it been going so far?
All right. In the last week and a half, we've been to 3 Columbias. We're in Bogota, Colombia, British Columbia, now District of Columbia. So
nice. Where
it's
do
the
we
Columbus
rank?
tour.
How are we doing?
The reverse, huh?
Yeah, the Columbus tour in reverse?
Yeah.
That sounds good. That sounds right. So here's a question for you right off. Much to my surprise, the Washington Post noticed that we were doing this event tonight and published a notice about it. They had us right up there, right underneath Hootie and the Blowfish, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, we made it.
Yeah, we made it. And their description of you was, see Boots Riley, this is a quote, a rap artist who dabbles in activism. I've never thought of you as a dabbler.
I don't even know what dabbling is. That sounds like a drug thing or something.
I don't know. That's an Oakland thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But first, I wanted to give you, before we talk about the activism that you are, quote unquote, dabbling in, I wanted to give you a chance to rewrite that description. Like if you were playing editor at the Washington Post, how would you describe yourself?
A former organizer who has fooled everybody into thinking he's an artist.
Okay.
Or it fooled everybody into thinking only a few of us are artists, because the truth is we all have that ability. And I didn't. I wasn't good at what I was doing, and I made myself get good at what I was doing for a purpose.
Now, I read somewhere that you wanted to be Prince. So what happened?
So yeah, when I was like 12, that was my main goal, was to be like Prince, but to not rehearse or practice guitar or anything like that. I just wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to be something. And I think that's really what what's behind that is that most of us are told, especially when we're kids in some way, that we're not really anything important. But we see the folks on TV, and that's definitely something important. They definitely matter. And I think we all want our lives to mean something, even though people aren't supposed to go through midlife crises till they're my age. We're going through that. Most of us are going through some version of that through our whole life, like trying to figure out what our life means. And it happens at a young age for many folks. And so later on, I became involved in organizing by the time I was 14 or 15. And, that was part of that same thing. Like all of a sudden, I felt like my life meant something. I was part of helping organize an anti-racist farm, what was called the Anti-Racist Farm Workers Union in Central California. And I could see my actions as part of building a movement, part of building a revolutionary movement. And that made me forget about wanting to be Prince. And I actually, at the time, I didn't sum it up like that. At the time, I summed it up as those being, the previous things that I wanted as being very individualistic and, a symptom of capitalism. But, it really is part of just the same yearning to make our lives matter.
Now, I know you do a lot more than dabble in activism. For people who don't know, Boots Riley has recently been involved in a very intimate fight, one that affects your family, like fighting to defend your cousin, Carlos Riley, who was accused of shooting a police officer in Durham, North Carolina in 2012, and 2 weeks ago, he was found to be not guilty by a jury. And you were extremely vocal about this case. Now, perhaps you could talk about the Carlos Riley story, because sometimes when we hear about these individual stories, it just gives us a much better idea about what's wrong systemically.
So yeah, my cousin Carlos Riley Jr., he was 21 years old at the time. He got pulled over by a plainclothes cop and who started assaulting him and told him verbally, "I'm going to kill you." But while he was drawing his weapon, he shot himself in the leg. And Carlos took that opportunity to take the gun away from him, push the cop who was now inside his car out of the car, and take off. 3 hours later, he turned himself in. They charged him with assault on an officer, shooting an officer, and with robbery of the gun. So he went to trial, robbery of the gun, and so because you're not allowed to. Well, let's go. So he went on trial, and all the evidence, the physical evidence and the testimony, all corroborated his story. Like the DA kept presenting these witnesses, like, "See, yeah, somebody saw him holding the gun," and basically it was like, "Yeah, he was holding the gun and he was pointing it away from the cop while he was pushing the cop away from him." And then someone found a cell phone in which other cops were texting. It was the cop's cell phone. Other cops were texting Officer Stewart saying, "We heard you had an accident," right? So they knew. But this was presented And there was all this other physical evidence that didn't support the cop's story, and supported Carlos's story. And he got found not guilty of all the charges except for one, which was robbery of the gun. And so, because the judge didn't allow them to consider taking the gun self-defense. So that's up for appeal. But they have been, the DA from the get-go has tried to get the lawyer thrown off the case. They are probably, for the appeals part, going to get put a different court-appointed lawyer on the case just because this one did such a good job. After the not guilty verdicts came in, then documents surfaced that showed that the DA's office and the police department knew from day one that the cop had shot himself. There was a ballistics report that was filled out by an officer that interviewed Officer Kelly, and it said 1 shot fired by officer. And there was another report that said a similar thing, and then a third workers' comp filing that mysteriously can't be found, that probably says that it was an accident. Now, these are things that they knew from the get-go, and they still tried to railroad my cousin. My cousin's been in jail for almost 3 years now. So the appeal will be put forward, and hopefully even that last charge will be taken down. But he's in jail under federal charges for having the gun. He has a previous possession of cocaine charge, and so he was indicted federally under the charge of having the gun, just with the idea that it doesn't matter why you had the gun. Even if you took the gun away from the cop who was trying to kill you with that gun, you have a felony cocaine possession charge, so you are not allowed to do that. You're supposed to do what the cop says and get killed.
Now, this is Durham, North Carolina. Now, what school is in Durham, North Carolina, everybody? Yeah, good. Someone said North Carolina Central. You see, I was testing you. No, it was Duke. Not just Duke. But I will say that I have interviewed players from the Duke NCAA powerhouse team, and the players at Duke, the black players, have horrible stories about the Durham police, about being drawn upon. They have a special number to call the coach, Mike Krzyzewski, every time they're stopped by police, so we can tell the police, no, they're actually players, so they can get out of situations like that.
Well, a guy supposedly killed himself in the back of a police car with handcuffs on. Shot himself.
That's sounds like some Prince George's County cases from years past. If people remember the case of Archie Elliott. So I mentioned that because when I've talked to the players at Duke, they talk about the Durham police as being like particularly bad, particularly brutal, particularly racist. You travel around a lot of places. You talk a lot of places. Do you think that's the case, that different officers in different cities are better or worse, or it's safer or less safe, or across the board, is this just dangerous times to run afoul of the police, particularly for black and brown people?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of times it's easy to look at these things as personality contests. Like if we just had nicer officers, if we just had a nicer police chief, a less racist one. I mean, this was a black cop that did this, first of all, right? So the answer of getting more black cops obviously is not part of it. I mean, think about Nigeria. It's black people, black cops, and they're all violent and they're brutal, right? So it's not. It's the system that makes the cops have to be this way, and cops act differently in different ways, and so racist oppression has a utility. Cops are acting upon that, and So no matter who you put in those places, they have a function. Right now, the cops have a particular function, and that's based on where we are in this system and how this system works. So you have to back it up and look at why there's this racist utility. How does that work? Now the point is that in this system, under capitalism, you must have a certain amount of unemployment for capitalism to exist. You cannot have full employment under capitalism. If you had full employment under capitalism, the boss couldn't fire you, because so they need they need an unemployed army of workers to say that to replace the ones that are working, so that they can keep wages low. Matter of fact, you'll see Wall Street Journal and other financial publications worrying when the unemployment rate goes too low, because that means wages will start going up. So if there has to be a certain amount of unemployed people for capitalism to work, that means there are a certain amount of unemployed people who need to eat. And what do people do when they need to eat? They don't let themselves starve. They're going to create jobs. And those jobs are going to be often in the illegal economy. And so illegal business, just like legal business, uses violence to regulate itself. If you have a grocery store and someone tries to leave out with a cart full of groceries without paying, they're going to be met with the physical force, either from the private security of the supermarket or from the public security, the public business security, which is called the police. The police are the physical force that regulates business. You know, in the 1920s, if you rob the liquor dude, gangsters come after you. Right now, you rob the liquor dude, the police come after you. 10 years ago in Oakland, California, you rob a weed dude. If the weed dude is connected, gangsters come after you. Right now, you rob the weed dude, the police come after you. It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. It's business regulation. Illegal business has to regulate itself. All of these, all these building codes and all of that, some other building can't just build into here because there are building codes. And those building codes are in the end enforced by a physical force that's called the police. If somebody's selling a key of cocaine, they can't, and there's a dispute, they can't go to court and say, Your Honor, I was supposed to buy a whole key of cocaine, and this is clearly 80% baking soda. I demand restitution. They can't go to the zoning commission and say, we're only supposed to have 3 dope dealers on this block, and it's clearly overcrowded. We need to rezone the way this is. Yeah. So what we see in this violence is actually just business regulation. It's part of capitalism. And in reality, if you look at statistics by the CDC, that violence has gone down by 1/3 since 1950. In 1950, there was more black-on-black violence than there is today. Yet they have us saying that that's our main problem right now.
I'll say,
right?
If folks want what Boots just said in a 3-minute song form, your parents' cocaine with backing kazoo. Very good.
Yeah, and so you have this situation in which they allow us to look at this, the violence and the quote-unquote crime, because it's kind of arbitrary what's crime and what's not. They have us looking at the violence and the crime as an outgrowth of people's mentality, and they make us look at it as an outgrowth of our culture. Like, why, what songs are people that are listening to that are making them shoot each other, and what are the ways that people walk down the street that cause them to be violent, things like that. and even nonprofits get into this game, right? So nonprofits will be like, okay, we're going to stop the violence, you know, because we know violence comes from the fact that people don't know how to wear the right tie to go to get a job interview. And we know that violence comes from the fact that people don't, you know, have the right problem-solving skills. They need to learn how to balance their checkbooks, and this will get them out of that. And a lot of the folks in those organizations understand that this is bullshit. But they have radical politics, they want a job, and they don't, you know, and they want something that seems like it, that at least says it's about social justice. So it's out there putting out the same idea that crime comes from people's bad behavior, or poverty comes from people's bad behavior, that poverty comes from the bad decisions that folks have made. And so you have this idea that poverty comes from the bad decision that folks have made. And the easiest thing to do, how do you paint that picture, right? How is that idea easier sold? That idea is easier sold by putting all of that on the other, right? So you have, you know, white working class that are poor that look at what's happening with black folks and say, see, yeah, they're making those, you know, they're listening to that music, they're getting, you know, that's why they don't have jobs. And this is somebody might be unemployed themselves, making $20,000 a year, but they end up identifying with the system. And that's how racism has a utility. Because
it was such a crazy clap for that. That's absolutely. I agree. It was such a crazy story to hear out of Boston about these two white guys who beat up a Latino man, and they urinated on him, and they said they were doing it because Donald Trump speaks to them. And then you find out afterwards that they were both squatting illegally in public housing. And they're like, exactly. So they're like anchor whiteys. So how do we? What do you think's the most effective way to bridge?
Well, so, and I know I'm long-winded, but the point is that so there's been a license given to the police based on this idea of what creates poverty and what creates violence, and that license is not only given to the police by, you know, the right-wing media and Fox News, it's given by many liberals who have said that this is the answer, that we gotta teach people the right way to be, how to stop being savage, and so police themselves. Let's say you're a cop. Why if besides just wanting a paycheck, someone became a cop saying, "Hey, I don't like this crime on the street." Somehow that's the most important thing to them. They don't like the crime on the street. They want to stop what's happening. So instead of understanding how the system works and understanding that that's actually a natural outgrowth of capitalism, they've decided that crime is a decision by the individual, or is created by this, you know, by this culture that folks have. So their enemy are the people, often are the people in the community themselves. So you can be a black cop, and most of them have that idea, and which is why that happened with my cousin, with the black cop.
Wow. So there is a movement now, Black Lives Matter. You were just in Ferguson performing at the 1-year anniversary of the killing of Michael Brown by Officer Darren Wilson. What are you seeing in this movement? Does it address some of the issues that you've already talked about tonight? And what did you see in Ferguson?
So I'm really inspired by the fact that there are so many movements popping up all over the place. It's clear that everybody wants to figure out a way to change these things, and people are ready to get involved and come and show their solidarity. This is happening in this last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, a few years ago with Occupy, there are things popping up all over the world where folks are taken to the streets and showing that they're fed up. I think where it's at and what I get from people that I'm talking to in it is there's a mixture of excitement and a mixture of the question that haunts everybody that's involved in a movement. Well, what do we do with this? How does this work? Right? How do we actually make this affect some sort of change? And that gets asked to people that are organizing all the time. And often the answer is, I don't know. Or it's something, but the real answer inside is, I don't know. And because a lot of our movements have been based on just that. Let's get a lot of people into the streets in one way or another, and let's show that we're fed up. And then we don't really have a way to go from there, because I think that the left since the 60s has been about that, has been about showing that we're fed up, coming out, showing up at demonstrations. But I think that, you know, for the 40, 50 years before the 60s, that's not what the left and radical movements had been about. I think that the left has been all about showing, has all been about spectacle for so long that that's why many people don't join it. Because they say, okay, well, I see you're doing the marches. I actually agree with what you're saying, but I don't know if it will do anything. And it hasn't always been this way. In the 20s and 30s in the United States, there was a mass militant radical labor movement. There was in the Midwest, people were occupying factories and getting victories with that. Even in Utah, Colorado, Alabama, places like that, there were militant mining strikes. In Alabama, people took up arms against the corporate thugs that were coming to stop them from having their strike. There was Haymarket. That was in the 1880s. And so
shout out your favorite labor battles, please. We'll give them love. Yeah, Centralia, Flint. Got some love for Toledo out there. 34, Autolite. All right, go ahead.
So in the 20s and 30s, you had this mass militant labor movement going on. According to the documentary Seeing Red, there were 1 million card-carrying communists in the United States in the 20s and 30s. You had a somewhat unrelated bonus march happening in the 20s where veterans marched to the White House, and some of them armed, and they were met by the Army. All of this whole trajectory, and along with revolutions happening around the world at the time, made the U.S. ruling class scared that there might be able to be an actual viable revolutionary movement growing. Not that that could have happened right then, but that it was growing. And that's where things like the New Deal came along. Right? It didn't come because people were like, we got to get FDR elected and then we can get our radical ideas done. He can open up the door. No, they were scared that there was going to be a radical movement with the ability to shut down industry that grew into something revolutionary. And that's where the New Deal came from. It was very powerful. During World War II, the communists decided to have a united front against fascism with the U.S., meaning that in order to allow the U.S. to help defeat Hitler, they would not confront the U.S. on their own soil anymore. So they went underground for years, which left it open to when the 50s came along, the McCarthy era House Un-American Activities Committee was able to say, hey, look at that dude right there, point at revolutionaries and say, look, they've been lying to you. They haven't been telling you who they are. And this was true. They hadn't been. Whereas maybe 20 years before, if they did that, people would have said, I know, because I've been working with them on this other thing, right? But at that point, revolutionaries were underground, and the House Un-American Activities Committee were able to attack people, and that combined with revelations of atrocities from Stalin in the 50s made the largest revolutionary grouping in the United States break up into all these little pieces that became the New Left. That became the New Left of the 60s, and of course other things grew out of that. But the New Left did something very different from the time immediately preceding it, and which was to say, fuck that, we're revolutionaries, right? They were out with it. But what they also did was move away from organizing around those same material issues. They weren't organizing labor anymore. They were moving people to cities and focusing on students. And that focus on cities and students, on certain big cities and students, necessitated a different kind of organizing. And it necessitated an organizing based on spectacle, based on, let's get a bunch of people in the street, let's do this dramatic thing, let's bring attention to this thing. And this was very different than what had been 40 years before, because before that, a demonstration was just that. Look how many people we have to shut down your industry. It was a show of force. It wasn't the be-all, end-all. In the 60s, getting into the street became the be-all, end-all. Or it became promoted as that. And of course, I'm essentializing broadly, right? Because whatever, so sue me. But there's definitely really great exceptions to this. There was the Detroit Revolutionary Union movement, things like that. But for the most part, actual class struggle on the job site was left alone by radicals. And what we had since then is a style of organizing that does not have the teeth to deliver on the demonstration that we're actually saying that we're doing. A demonstration of power, but we're not organizing around what we know is our power. Now, many radicals, if you are a radical, then you know that our main power comes at the main contradiction of capitalism. And that main contradiction of capitalism has to do with the exploitation of labor. And that's where our power is the fact that we create profit. But most of us, when we organize, we're not organizing on the job. We're organizing after work or somewhere else, Saturdays, whatever. And it's an extracurricular activity. And we're asking people to come get involved in something else, and they're like, oh, I got to go pay the bills. Well, yeah, them paying the bills, that individual struggle is supposed to be what we're about, right? We're about transforming that individual struggle into a collective struggle, but we've left that alone, and so it comes to a point where we have a lot of people frustrated about the way the police are working, but we don't have any power to actually affect it. And what ends up happening is we say, get your voice into the street. That's what we need to do. And that's really selling a fantasy, selling a falsehood about how the system works. We know that this system doesn't work by the fact that a lot of people say that they're upset about something and things change for the better. That's a first step. We need spectacle because we need to get together and we need to understand who's on our side. But we're saying to people that that's what needs to happen. But the way that we affect change is by making the folks in power make that change by giving them no choice. We give them either you make these changes that may give you less profit, or you make no profit because we've shut down this part of your industry. We've shut down that part of your industry. We are not there at that level to do that right now, realistically, because we haven't been working in those places, in those fields for a long time. At least radicals haven't.
Damn, all the busboy staff is going to walk off the job by the time we're done with it. All right, you've talked about police brutality and you've talked about labor. Another and the centrality of linking these issues, but another issue is Palestine, and I bring that up because last week you joined more than 1,000 black activists, artists, and scholars into signing on to a statement that, by the way, if you missed, this was like covered in Ebony. I mean, this wasn't just like leftist press. Like the entire black press was covered the fact that over 1,000 people signed a statement saying, quote, "The liberation of Palestine's land and people must be at hand." And given that you've spoken about labor and that you've talked about police brutality, largely in the United States, what is it about the linkage to Palestine that you think is so important for people who care about those other issues?
Well, I mean, Palestine is very linked to the United States, business-wise, strategically, for the U.S. military, and people-wise. Like a lot of the settlers in Palestine are from New Jersey, right?
In Brooklyn, yeah.
In Brooklyn, right? But I would say this: one reason that it is of interest to me, because it is. I mean, I'm a human being, and those are human beings over there. But anytime you have a nationalism without class analysis, it doesn't matter what you start with. You're going to end up with a fascist state, right? A nationalism without class analysis that gets some sort of power is going to end up being a fascist state. And that's what you got right there. You have a state that no matter how they try to slice it up and say what land is what part land, blah, 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 the land that's controlled by the state of Israel, most of the people in it are not allowed to vote. And the reasoning behind them not being allowed to vote on who rules them is that, they're not going to let us to keep ruling them if we let them vote. And then, yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I've supported the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement for a long time. I think that and this is something that's not talked about a lot, that I don't end up talking about a lot. My mother's father is black. My mother's mother is German Jewish, and was a Holocaust survivor. And her brother, my grandmother's brother, was a communist, a Jewish communist in Germany, who fought the Nazis before they were in power, and was in a group that would go beat down Nazis with bats. And he was one of the first to find out that he was going to get killed, and he escaped and became part of the resistance in France. And none of them supported what Israel is doing, right? And it's not really, some people try to tie being Jewish with supporting Israel, and it's really that's really just like someone supporting some fascist state because they are the same whatever background as the folks that are running it. So it's real, I just want, and then the reason that it's 1,000 black artists is that we're at a place where there's movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, and it needs to become more powerful. It needs to unite with struggles that are similar to it all around the world, and that's one move in that direction.
And there's so many linkages, of course, between, including the very weaponry that's used in terms of the oppression of Palestinians and what we're seeing in cities in the United States.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Oakland police train with the Israeli military, and I'm sure that's you might know.
Yeah, DC too.
Yeah. Okay.
But the question, there are, one of the things that made the statement so amazing and important and politically vital is that there are also people in the Black Lives Matter movement who think that it's a distraction to make those kinds of linkages to Palestine. What do you say to that idea?
I mean, I'd say that's pretty short-sighted. I don't know any other movement that was actually that got big that wasn't able to make their linkages with other struggles that were going on. I mean, the Black Panther Party, for all their faults and everything, they actually offered to send 100 people to help the Viet Cong fight the U.S. And so people are saying, oh, we shouldn't even sign a document that says we're down with folks struggling in Palestine. I mean, that's a bit.
It's a low bar compared to what you just said, certainly. Well, we have a few more minutes here before we want to let the crowd be able to ask questions, make comments, whatever have you. But it would be a sin if I didn't ask you a couple of music questions, just a couple. And start with The Atlantic, which just put out this article that was very Atlantic about, and I mean that in the worst, most insulting possible way. And it was called Why Is There No More Political Hip Hop? Was the name of the article. And beyond that, you were just at Ferguson, doing a concert. Obviously, you're an artist of renown. So I just want to ask, what is the state of the art in your mind?
Well, I think that art grows out of movements. I come out of a movement, and that movement was pretty small, so there's only one Coup group, right? There could be a lot more. I think that music grows out of the movement that's around. The biggest movement right now, obviously, is the movement for people to survive individualistically, and it's capitalism. And so people are going to make music about what's around them. If we want to have more music that's talking about actual social change and struggling against the system, we're going to have to be involved in struggling against the system more, right? Like when people see Jay-Z and they love his lyrics, it's not that they think that they're going to be as rich as him. A few people may hope that, but they see somebody that doesn't have to worry about paying the bills next week. They don't have to worry about maybe being kicked out of their house. And that sounds a lot like freedom to them, right? And we haven't connected radical struggles to people's actual way that they survive. We haven't been talking about these things that people need in a radical way, in a way that is also tied with transforming society. So, folks see these politics as extracurricular. Like, you could do it if you got time, right? If you got everything else handled, you could do it. Because that's what we've been talking about. We haven't been talking about what they're dealing with throughout the whole day, which is trying to put food on the table. So it's our fault that Jay-Z is the closest thing to freedom that they've seen. It's our fault. It's our fault for leaving certain kinds of struggles behind, because that's what these rappers are talking about. They're talking about, this is how you survive. Why aren't these movements talking about that? Right? And that's what people want to know. One of the worst compliments that I would ever get is people being like, oh, I love your shit, but I mainly got to listen to that real shit. And what they meant at the time, because really in the 90s, we were talking about, in our music, talking about a movement that did not exist, right? Those movements that, that a lot of it was like, prefigurative, fantasy, right? We're talking about all these things going on, and it really wasn't around yet. But what was true is if somebody rapped about the fact that you could sell a rock for $10 and have $10, that was true. That was real. It might not have been. It might not be strategically the best thing to do, and it might not be politically the best thing to do. But we're not giving it by running away from wage struggles. and making, by running away from making a mass, militant, radical labor movement, we're leaving everybody to talk to the folks that are talking about how they survive. And so that's where that music comes from. We want to make more, quote unquote, conscious music. We got to have a real movement dealing with this stuff. And the artists will come afterward.
Now, the artist, the hip-hop artist of the moment in 2015 is someone who talks about struggle, Kendrick Lamar. I did want to ask you what your thoughts were about Kendrick Lamar, about his music, and about where you think he's taking the form.
Well, form-wise, I love it, you know. I love the experimentation. I love the fact that he was on top and he made an album that was, you know, that wasn't like radio ready or anything like that. It wasn't what they're playing on the radio. Form-wise, with the writing of the lyrics, I love it, and I listen to his stuff all the time. Politically, I think people are saying it's way more progressive than it is. I mean, his whole thing is exactly that idea about black folks that I told you, like we're fucking up, right? That's what it's saying. This is, you know, his politics aren't very far off from Bill Cosby, right?
Damn.
Right? It's not. And there's a lot of rappers whose politics are pretty much the same way, which is like, okay, you know, black folks need to learn how to balance their checkbook, need to learn how to stop spending money on this. Black folks need to learn how to stop being violent to each other, love each other, and that's the problem. And as a matter of fact, when the whole Ferguson thing went down, his answer was, why are we complaining about that when we're killing each other? And again, I need to bring home, the truth is that in 1950, 30% more black folks were killing each other than now. In the time when we talk about the civil rights movement, when that was going on, when nobody was talking about, when black folks understood that that wasn't the agenda to talk about black on black violence, there was more black on black violence then than now. But somehow people have been fooled into thinking that that is the main part of the agenda. And that the numbers just don't bear it out. So Kendrick isn't alone in that. That actually has passed for what conscious music has been for a long time. When they talk about conscious music, you know, there's a lot of stuff where what they say is conscious is really somebody preaching down to the listener saying, you don't got your shit together, you know. You don't have, you know, you need to, you know, learn how to, you know, go to school, do your work, get to work on time, treat your mother right, you know, be a father to your child, that sort of thing, and everything will get back right. And these are based on actual myths about the black community that we hold ourselves. And because I come from organizations that talk about changing the economic structure of the system, and that will change the culture that we exist in, I've always been like, look, this whole system is messed up. Let's go change it.
Wow. So I was want to clap on that. I got two more questions, a request, and then we'll open it to the crowd. First question is, we did this once before where I was asking you questions on a stage, and I said to you, if you were on a desert island, what's the one book you would have to have? And you said to me, I'd want a book called How to Build a Boat. And people laughed so much, I didn't have the heart to re-ask it. So I shall ask again in a different way. What's a book you would recommend other than your own, which, by the way, I have read, and it is, if my kids weren't here, I would curse right now. It is fantastic, this book. This is so good. But other than this book, what's a book that you would recommend people read?
You know, there's different, I read for different reasons. Like, I'm reading a lot of fiction because that inspires me creativity. I don't know how to say creatively, but
Create stuff.
creatively. So, like, Michael Ondaatje has a book called Coming Through Slaughter about Buddy Bolden at the turn of the century. He has another book called, so he has these three little, I like the little books because then I can read them without spreading it out over a long time. Another book called Collected Works of Billy the Kid, and another book of poems called The Cinnamon Peeler. As far as nonfiction, I've been reading a lot of art stuff. There's this book called 9.5 Theses on Art and Class that especially artists should read. I actually got Haymarket to send me a bunch of those and passed them out to a lot of my friends. And it talks about the practical limitations of thinking that artists are going to change the world, right? And because, a lot of artists will get out there and be like, I'm putting my stuff out there, that's my contribution. And unfortunately, maybe that is all you have time for, but it's not enough, right? Because your art changes based on what you do with your life, right? Your art can be insular and not really striking the right chord because you're not involved or connected with the movements that are dealing with that campaign. But anyway, that's an interesting book to get.
And this last question is, I'm asking it because you put it on Twitter. Therefore, it's fair game. Can you tell the Paris Hilton story?
Okay. So I have one interaction with Paris Hilton, kind of. So in 2007, there was a Rage Against the Machine reunion. They hadn't played together in 7 years or something like that. And it was Coachella. They were headlining Coachella. And so right before the show, they're about to go on. There's 80,000 people in front of the stage. And since I know a bunch of those folks in Rage Against the Machine, I have a band with Tom Morello, I was able to be on the side of the stage. Now, the side of the stage was filled with all sorts of people besides family and friends of Rage Against the Machine. There was like every rock star you could, from Metallica to Red Hot Chili Peppers to Tommy Lee and other people you don't want to see. And various television personalities and all that, but it was packed. It was the side of the stage right there, and it was just packed, shoulder to shoulder, and everybody was trying to get closer to here so they could see. And now the Coachella, that side of the stage is exposed to the audience, so you could see the audience, you could see the stage, and through that packed shoulder-to-shoulder thing, started hearing, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. And like pushing through the crowd was Paris Hilton and some friend of hers. I mean, if I watched reality TV, I would know. But she was like a little bit shorter than her with black hair. That's all I know. And they were like, excuse me, pushing past. And then all of a sudden they got to this short Chicana woman who just wouldn't let them pass. And they kept being like, excuse me. And then the woman was like ignoring them, just looking forward. Excuse me. And then they were like, whatever. So they stopped there behind her. And I guess a couple minutes after that, somebody from the front of Rage Against the Machine's crowd spotted Paris Hilton and yelled, Paris Hilton, and threw a water bottle up and almost hit her, but it went and it hit the Chicana girl in the back. And the Chicana girl was like, she thought it was them, so she was like, "What the fuck?" She turned around, and then, right then Paris and the other girl said, "Oh, just a second ago, you know habla inglés." But what they didn't know is that girl was Zach De La Rocha's cousin. And all the security that was there, so there's like a rope right there, and they're right here, and all the security that was there, you know, were already friends with her and watching her, and they heard that, and like 1 second later, they yanked Paris and her friends just up out of the crowd over the rope, and you know, they're arguing and stuff, and he's just like, "I know who the fuck you are. Get the fuck out of here." And anyway, that's the end of the story.
Hey,
it was better. And she walked off sad.
I think we take our victories where we can get them, I think. Now, before we take it right to the crowd, I understand. I'll ask the crowd this. You want to hear Boots do some a cappella before we?
Real quick one, yeah.
All right.
Was there something else, though?
Oh, no. Well, I was going to announce that my boy VJ Prashad has a book talk September 21st out here at the Abramson Family Founders Room, SIS building. There's somebody here with some information. So it's about for the book Letters to Palestine.
Yeah.
So check that out. Okay. So this is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog, me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog, me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. I raise this glass for the ones who die meaninglessly and the newborns who get fed intravenously. Somebody's mama caught a job and a welfare fraud case. When she breathes, she swear it feel like plastic wrap around her face. Lights turned off. This the 3rd month the rent is late. Thoughts of being homeless, crying till you hyperventilate. Despair permeates the air and sets in her hair. The kids play with that one toy they learned how to share. Coming home don't ever seem to be a celebration. Bills stay piled up on the coffee table like they decoration. Heaping spoons of peanut butter, big-ass glass of water. Make the hunger subside. Save the real food for your daughter. You feel like swinging haymakers at a moving truck. You feel like laughing so it seems like you don't give a fuck. You feel like getting so high you smoke the whole damn crop. You feel like crying, but you think that you might never stop. Homes with no heat stiffen your joints like arthritis. If this was fiction, it'd be easier to write this. Some folks try to front like they so above you. They tear this motherfucker up if they really loved you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. There's certain tricks of the trade to try to halt your defeat, like taking Tupperware to an all-you-can-eat, returning used shit for new, saying you lost your receipt, and writing 4-figure checks when your accounts deplete. Then all your problems pile up about a mile up, thinking about a partner you could dial up to help you out this vile stuff. Whole family sleeping on a futon while you clipping coupons, eating salad, trying to get full off the croutons. Cross town, the situation is identical. Somebody getting strangled by the system and its tentacles. Misconceptions raise questions to be solved. A lot of dope boys is broke. A lot of homeless got jobs. You could make 8 bones an hour till you pass out and still be ass out. Most pyramid schemes don't let you cash out. They say this generation made the harmony break. But crime rise consistent with the poverty rate. You take the workers from jobs, you gon' have murders and mobs. A gang of preachers screaming sermons over murmurs and sobs, saying, pray for a change from the Lord above you. They tear this motherfucker up if they really loved you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog. You like this song because it's relatable. It's you in a rhyme. We go to stores that only let us in 2 at a time. We live in places where it costs to get your check cashed. Arguments about money usually drown out the tech blast. Work 6 days a week, can't sleep Saturdays though. Muscles trembling like a pager when the battery's low. And you still don't know where the years went. Although every single shift feel like a year spent. And you could write your resume, but it wouldn't even mention all the life lessons learned during 6 years of detention. And how you learned the police was just some handicappers on the ground next to broken glass and candy wrappers. So don't accept my collects on the phone. Just hit me back at the house so I know I ain't alone. And we could chop it up about this messed up system. Homies that's been killed, how we always gonna miss them. It's almost impossible surviving on this fraction. Sip a 40 to the brain for the chemical reaction. You gotta hustle cause they'll try to push and shove you. I tear this motherfucker up since I really love you. This is for my folkers who got bills overdue. This is for my folkers, check 1, 2. This is for my folkers, never lived like a hog. Me and you, toe to toe. I got love for the underdog.
Round of applause. Absolutely.
Round of applause for Boots. And David, that was amazing.